We're starting to record. I'm going to move that out of your way. Okay, and then, yep, and then just press down. Sometimes what happens though, it gets weird and it gets stuck. So you gotta click the arrow. Okay? Yeah. All right. No, that's okay. I just want to get rid of my gum. Nobody needs to hear that. Hello, everyone. This is Tony Trahan, and I'd like to welcome everyone and thank everyone for attending this, which is our third in our monthly webinar series, and this one is on cultural competence. I'd like to thank Elatisha Kiernan and Hector Pabon for their time and their effort in joining us today. Elatisha Kiernan and Hector Pabon, they provide training and support to OMH facilities and licensed agencies around cultural competence. So I'll just give people a brief orientation to the webinar format for people who haven't attended before. Excuse me. But due to the volume of participants, that we have to keep the lines muted. But you can ask questions, so please feel free to ask questions via the chat function on the webinar control panel at your computer. If you have a question about a specific page, please note the page number, and we'll be taking 3 breaks today for questions and answers. And then we can scroll back to it, so if you please just give us the page number, we can go back to that. And when the webinar ends, I know a number of people have been interested in receiving certificates of participation. We've been sending those out expeditiously afterwards. So when the webinar ends, you will receive a short survey. Please take the time to fill out the survey, and that would be the place where you can put in your mailing address and the information that we need to get you the certificates. And just out of curiosity, we have, people like to know how many other people are on. We currently have 83 people in attendance right now, and I'm sure there will be more joining us in a few minutes. So without further ado, here is Elatisha Kiernan and Hector Pabon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elatisha Kiernan. I'm from the Bureau of Cultural Competency, and I'm conducting a training on cultural competency. And what I hope to accomplish from this training today is for everyone to have like a beginning stage and understanding of what cultural competency is and how we can incorporate that in the services that we provide. The first thing I'd like to discuss is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. No person in the United States shall, on ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation and be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination. So that means any programs under Title VI that receive any type of federal or financial assistance are obligated to provide services for those persons seeking them in regards to language, access, and the cultural aspect. New York State Office of Mental Health and their dedication has created the Bureau of Cultural Competence, the MAC, and supports the research around from the Centers of Excellence, the Cultural Competence Centers of Excellence. The Bureau of Cultural Competency conducts trainings and provides technical support to agencies around cultural competency, and we provide those services for free. And then we have the MAC, which is a statewide committee that meets quarterly to advise OMH about cultural competency issues in New York State's communities. And the Centers of Excellence provides OMH with evidence-based research around cultural competency and how to implement that within the agency to produce effective change. What is cultural competency? Excuse me. Cultural competency is a set of behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system or agency or amongst professionals, which enables the system or those professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. So if you notice here, the policy, practice, service delivery, treatment, and procedures all come together working simultaneously to help our consumers towards recovery. Those practices within the agency that influence effective service delivery, such as with New York State Office of Mental Health, we have policies surrounding in our programs such as PROS or ACT or our Clinics Plus. And these programs ensure that cultural competency is considered in treatment. It ensures that the family is involved and that there's self-determination. Cultural competency differs from sensitivity, awareness, and knowledge. Cultural sensitivity is knowing the difference or similarities in different cultural groups. Like you may know about or may have some basis of like an Asian community or Asian person, but that doesn't make you culturally competent. And awareness is developing that sensitivity and understanding of another group. This usually involves changing some types of attitudes or some type of behaviors. And knowledge is being familiar with those type of differences in a group, their characteristics, their history, their belief system. But the difference is with cultural competency is taking all of that knowledge and putting it into practice and standard procedures for quality services. So here we have Davis' example of what cultural competency is. It's having knowledge and information and data from and about individuals and groups. And once we gather that information, it's taking that information and integrating it and transforming it into standard skills and practices. So we as providers, peer supports, and case managers, how do we put that into practice? And how on an organizational level do we enforce that through our policies? Do we have language? Do we have a language policy that ensures that when a person comes to seek treatment and they do speak a different language, that we have in place a policy that informs the patient, A, of their right to have interpreters, or B, do we have a procedure that immediately allows for them to have interpreter services access for their treatment? And how do we market that to our clients? How do we market the services that we have? How do we inform them that we have language access? Do we put that on a brochure? Is it available in their language, that brochure, informing them that we do have those services? At this point, I would like to ask if anybody has any questions about what we just covered, and take a moment to give people a chance to ask questions.
Okay, we have one question right now, which is, and you may need to repeat this so everyone can hear it. How is cultural competency measured as an evidence-based practice in programs funded by OMH?
Within OMH, the question was, how is evidence-based practice being measured within OMH? Right now, within particular programs, per se, I'm just going to talk about PROS, what we're trying to do, because it hasn't been accomplished yet. But what they're trying to do is to look at the inclusion of cultural competence based treatment, the measures of, say, for instance, if they're doing a cultural assessment, to see how that is being placed into their treatment. Does that answer your question, or?
Well, I don't. That's not my question. So
The person.
Yeah. Yeah, that was. I think that was a sufficient answer. If not, then they can type in a follow-up question.
If that didn't answer your question, you can type in a follow-up question and we can get back to you in detail. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Can you repeat the definition of sensitivity? The three were really well stated, and I wanted to use them in my work.
Yes. Cultural sensitivity is knowing that cultural differences exist without assigning any type of values, for better or worse, right or wrong, to those cultural differences. And if you also email us at the end, I can also email that link to you for your assistance with your work.
What are the particular skills a staff member needs in order to be culturally competent?
The question was, what are the particular skills that a staff person needs to be culturally competent? There's a lot of different things that encompasses, but the most important thing that I can say right now is that the willingness to be open to differences in cultures and maintaining what we like to say an asking stance. Being able to be ask the questions as to assuming the questions that we know the answer. And when we do find out that information, not to ignore it, but to try to incorporate that in our willingness to engage the consumer or client or whomever. Hector would also like to answer that question. That's my colleague.
Hello, everyone. I think it's important that clinicians also take into mind in identifying the client's cultural background and their origin and their language of preference. And I think that's very important in the engagement phase in dealing with and interacting with your clients, that you really get into their culture and find out how it can help you and them connect, especially in treatment and developing a treatment plan, to find out what would help the client and understand its connections as well with culture in the treatment process.
And if that person also wants any type of assessment types of tools, we can, if you leave your email at the end of the training, we can also email those assessment tools.
Yeah, we already have everyone's email address. So what we can do is we can send out supporting documents and materials to everyone afterwards.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Could you elaborate on cultural assessment?
Cultural assessment, those are, the cultural assessment has particular questions, open-ended questions that you would ask a client, like you would ask them their migration status, what language they speak at home, what language, you would ask them particular questions about their language. Say, for instance, somebody's a particular religion. You would ask them, do they need to have certain services set up prior to them coming to your office? Like some women that are Muslim cannot speak to men. So you would want to know, do you need a female provider? So that's what type of cultural assessment you would need. And we do have tools like that that you can look over to see how you can incorporate that in your services.
Does OMH have a tool to ensure the staff person engages the client?
Are you talking about measuring whether that client was engaged or not?
I don't know. It just says, does OMH have a tool to ensure the staff person engages the client?
Can you be more specific about, does OMH have a tool to make sure the staff person engages the client?
What I'll do is I'll send them a note, and then we'll move to the next one.
Okay, we're gonna the last question will be responded to at the end. We're gonna move on with our segment. And the next segment is disconnections for treatment and engagement. In the Surgeon General report, supplemental report about culture, race, and ethnicity in mental health, it basically supports the avenue that culture does matter, and that culture influences the availability and access to services, the likelihood of receiving services, and the likelihood of receiving poor quality of care, and overrepresentation in hospitalizations, and underrepresented in mental health research. Sorry about the noise. Now I'd like to discuss some social foundations for disparities. The first one is race. Race is socially constructed based on physical characteristics. So when we seek to understand based on the color of skin, we will reinforce particular stereotypes. Age is another social foundation for disparity. Gender, language, disability, government policies, religion, incarceration, community location, and poverty. Language is an important one because it talks to our capabilities to engage clients, because even if sometimes you speak the same language, you may be speaking over them and they might not understand, or you may give them documents, especially with medical documents such as your rights. They might not even understand. Their literacy level may not be they may not be able to comprehend those documents. So it's important that we assess if the client is able to comprehend those type of tools. Their disability and the government policies. Government policies, when we speak about government policies, we're talking about policies that such as a person that's an immigrant that comes to this country and they may need services. They're not able to access services as easy as a person that a U.S. citizen, and they'll be restricted from the capability of insurance, because you can't apply for services unless you have a status here. So those type of policies keep immigrants out and refugees out. Then incarceration, when more minorities get their first time treatment in prison. And being in a prison system or in a jail system is not an ideal place to get comprehensive mental health treatment or person-centered care treatment. Community location. In the rural community, there's not a lot of resources or access to therapists, psychiatrists, and even more for children receiving services. They even often have to get services through psychiatry. So these factors cause a disconnect for people receiving treatment. Now I would like to discuss privilege. Privilege is an unearned benefit. Some have more than others. It's often invisible to those who have it. As workers and advocates, we all have some privilege. And it is possible to have privilege and be part of that part of a marginalized group. So when I talk about privilege, privilege encompasses different things such as the ability to have insurance. You know, you take those type of things for granted. Employment, your education, having citizenship, having just knowledge about how to work or navigate the mental health system, which would be overwhelming to some people that have never experienced it, and intimidating. Before we move on to our next section, does anybody have any questions?
Yep. We we've got some clarification on the last question. So we had, the question was, does OMH have a tool to ensure the staff person engages the client in their culture? So in the person's culture.
The question was, does OMH have a tool to ensure that that a staff person engages a client in their culture? And by tool, I'm assuming that you mean a data question where we're able to view the information and ensure that the culture is considered. With our quality assurance team, they do measure to see if there's any cultural issues in regards to consumers within our agency, not on a county level, on a state level. And if they look at that to make sure that the client's engaged, and they're also doing a tracking of clients now as well. So they're trying to incorporate different types of tools. There's different measures and questions that the quality insurance asks when they go out to agencies. I hope that answered your question. If not, please, I will try to get back to you at the end.
And most people already have my email address, Tony Trahan. So, and people will be getting a follow-up email automatically. So if people have any further questions, they can feel free to send them back to me, and I'll get them answered for you through Letitia or Hector. Now we have some more questions coming in.
Okay, we have some more questions coming in.
Yeah, one person wants to know what is the benefit of this webinar? So I guess how will this benefit? What's the benefits of knowing cultural competence?
The benefit of being culturally competent is that you're able to engage clients on a more person-centered level, and it seeks to, with cultural competence, you seek to provide that whole centered, person-centered care of treatment. So when we'll notice that within your agency, that if you're not engaging a particular group, you'll be able to have, we can provide, like I said, we provide tools. You'll have tools and things like that to measure where you're at. So the benefit of it is being culturally competent, to be able to engage different folks.
Another thing is you'll see in the connections piece, really we want the consumers of this process and the family members to be aware of their rights. And that was covered under Title VI and so forth. We're going to cover some other issues that will empower you as consumers and family providers to acquire the services you need under the state regulations and federal regulations. And we're going to get into that in the next piece. But again, this is really to bring an awareness to everyone here about the importance of cultural competence and the value that all of us need to be informed of these things so that we can advocate for our services that meet your recovery needs.
Okay, so the next section is connections.
We still have a number of questions.
Oh, okay. Let's answer some more questions first. I'm sorry.
In slide number 8,
Mm-hmm.
the person says, I understand that race is socially constructed, but what is OMH doing to reduce the disparity that blacks experience in overrepresentation in court-ordered procedures and confinement, particularly around involuntary outpatient commitment through assisted outpatient treatment, Kendra's law?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that question.
Okay. So a couple of questions around privilege. One says, can you clarify privilege, please? And then the other one, as workers and advocates, I think you can answer, they're both basically the same. As workers and advocates, we all have some privilege. What do you mean by this?
I mean the fact that when we're sitting across from the table and we're seeking to assist people, sometimes we don't realize the barriers that are put up by just our demeanor, and having the knowledge and information and resources to assist others when they're coming to seek treatment in something that might be their first time in trying to to get like mental health services, especially for those persons of color.
The next question is, does OMH have documents that would help agencies run cultural diversity training programs?
Are you talking? We have trainings that we share with other OMH facilities and licensed agencies around cultural competency. We do have documents, yes.
Will Hector be presenting on this webinar? Hector?
Well, again, I will be definitely presenting at the points that are needed, as Letitia will be the main speaker for this presentation.
What is the difference in cultural competence and cultural sensitivity? Repeat the question.
What is the difference between cultural competency and cultural sensitivity? Cultural competency is the act of putting policies, procedures, and practices into play. Where cultural sensitivity is just the awareness of another culture, and it doesn't really put into motion the mechanics behind becoming culturally competent.
Can you provide us with examples of how consumers have been benefited?
The question was, can you provide examples how consumers were benefited from cultural competence? I'm going to let Hector handle that one.
Hello, everyone. Prior to me being an advocate specialist for OMH, I was a psychiatric social worker for Albany County Mental Health. And what I've utilized myself is my own cultural competence assessment tools, and they were directed to the consumer and families and asking them questions with regards to language, their culture of origin, their traditions and their values, and how to infuse that into treatment to be part of their treatment plan to produce better outcomes in the recovery process for them. Because I found that, to me, they would benefit more from this if I used the strengths and knowledge that they had in their healing processes, and that included spirituality. So I learned a lot from my experience and the importance how the clients have the answers. The clients and the family members have these valuable answers of recovery that we as clinicians or providers don't have and don't see. And it's very important, that we ask those questions, but at the same time that to empower the consumers and the family members to challenge providers to do this. Because it's very valuable in this engagement piece that you have rights to make sure that they hear your values and what works for you. So I hope that through this, that consumer, family members, peer advocates will challenge providers in doing this practice, because better outcomes of recovery will happen.
We're still getting a lot of questions around the concept of privilege. So what we have right here is how does privilege relate to cultural competence? What's the relationship between cultural competence and privilege?
The question was, how does privilege relate to cultural competence? And the reason that privilege relates to cultural competence, it's not directly related. It's related as a barrier. When you have privilege and you're not aware of it, it blocks the recovery process for the client, because you can have privilege and you can have your privilege and not be aware of it. It hinders the treatment process for your client if you don't ask the right questions, because you're assuming. So that's what we mean by privilege. And again, go ahead. Again, privilege is an unearned benefit. So it's things that we take for granted that we assume that others have. So it's just asking the right questions.
Cultural competence is also a regional issue. Is this not true? Regional.
I'm sorry, there was a question about cultural competency is a regional issue. Is that not true? I'm not clear because it's a national issue. That's why it's been taken on as it been.
Are there surveys or other data collecting techniques for providers that they may understand the importance of a particular culture's needs to better provide services for this group?
The surveys and tools that we have are not particular to any, like, say you're working with the South Asian group and you want to ask them particular questions, because that's not the point of cultural competence. Cultural competence is coming from more of an individual perspective and to ask the appropriate questions for each individual once you encounter them.
Yeah, I think providing, to add on to that, I think providers, you know, it's a good question. I think you're going to deal with this on an individual basis, you know, and as you come across a client who is different of culture or what have you, that's the time for you to connect with them and research that. There's a lot of individual research work out there that covers assessments of different cultures. So I think a lot of your experience is going to be during that time when you interact with those new clients, even the ones you have now, to address that. So it's more of an individual basis when it comes to doing that type of work.
Okay.
A couple more.
One second.
Yeah, again, some more stuff around privilege. Can't anyone access knowledge? How is it a privilege? And then I think ignorance is more of a privilege than knowledge. Okay, we're not going to go with that. Okay, what are those documents? How do we get copies of the documents about cultural competence?
We can contact you after the webinar to provide you with any documents. And you can be specific to say, it says, how can you contact us to get documents? You can contact our office directly, and that's 518-474-7118. And we also can email you after the presentation to get particulars about what documents you're looking for. If you're looking for individual assessments, organizational assessments, we have different tools that we can provide you with.
Are you trying to say that privilege is access or influence?
The question was, are we trying to say privilege is access and influence? I am trying to say that privilege is access when you know that you can access certain things. Yes, I am. But I'm not trying to say it's like influential wealth or anything like that.
Is it acceptable for an agency to refer a potential consumer to another agency if the specific language and skills needed to provide adequate services are not available at the first agency? Is this acceptable as long as a procedure is in place to make such referrals?
The question was, is it acceptable for an agency to refer a client to another agency when they don't have the resources available for language, and if they had that procedure in place?
Yes, I think the provider owes that to the consumer and family members. Again, it's about the recovery process of the client, and it would behoove the provider to make that referral to the proper treating agency to provide those services. And it's a disservice not to. Again, we're here, as you know, to serve the consumer and their family in the recovery process, and that's a great thing. And being a broker of services, which will be covered in the next presentation.
Okay. Is it really possible for a worker to be culturally competent, which differs from cultural sensitivity?
We believe that the question was, is it really possible for a worker to be culturally competent, which differs from cultural sensitivity? I believe that it is possible if you have that openness and willingness to learn from others, and the willingness to to connect with someone?
I think a lot of the questions here are very good questions around sensitivity, awareness, and knowledge. And cultural competence, again, stands beyond those three elements. Cultural competence is when you integrate into action that knowledge into your practice by changing your attitude, by acknowledging behavioral changes. That is cross-cultural. In other words, you infuse the part of the consumer that you serve as well as yourself in the recovery process. So cultural competence, again, is the bigger picture of those three elements that were discussed earlier. There is no comparisons. Being culturally sensitive, being culturally aware is not the same as being culturally competent, because being culturally competent is putting into practice and integrating that in the cultural competence behavior practice between the provider, the consumer, and the family member for positive outcome recoveries. I hope that answers your questions about those areas.
Please provide an example of how being culturally competent has changed a consumer's life. Can you share a story?
From my experience, again, as a social worker in Albany County, I had to help a lot of Hispanic families. I was the only Hispanic social worker at this time. So to me, I helped individuals at the county, other clients of Hispanic origin, with their social workers by giving them language access connections for interpreters for Hispanic outreach in the Albany County community, and to Catholic Charity, which is another organization that provides interpreter translation services. It's basically helping my other peers communicate with the Hispanic community that we serve. So it was very challenging. I also assisted in translating the materials that we have, the patient rights and so forth, and paperwork that we have in the intake process to Spanish language, so the informed consent. So I think, to me, they didn't exist when I was there, but just having those type of resources available to the clients, made a great impact, because now even my colleagues who were treating Hispanic consumers now had access to translated interpreter services and, to help them in their dynamics with their clients. So to me, that made a lot of impact in treatment and better outcomes.
Okay. How do we access the resource centers that assist the engagement of people of other cultures? We need a list of resource centers.
The question, excuse me, the question was, how do we access resources, and do we have a list for resources? I'm assuming throughout New York State of different cultural resources. We don't have I don't have a resource list, but you can also go to our OMH's website to access NKI, Nathan Klein Institute, or the Psychiatric Institute. They do have somewhat of a list of resources. The NKI, I believe, has a resource list of different cultural providers, and that's on the New York State Office of Mental Health website. If you go to the newsletter and access and press Cultural Competency, you'll see the links to NKI and Nathan Klein Institute and Psychiatric Institute.
Is there a specific agency or policy for helping undocumented immigrants?
That falls under Title VI. The question was, is there a specific agency or policy for helping undocumented immigrants? That's a difficult one because of their status, and anybody that comes to receive services under Title VI, they're covered to receive services. But it would be trying to get into their communities to let them know that they're eligible for services, because if they're undocumented, they're not willing to participate with services.
We've got like 2 more questions. Although an individual approach is always necessary, doesn't it help to have a broader knowledge of various ethnic groups?
The question was, although an individual approach is necessary, isn't it good to have a broader knowledge of different ethnic groups?
Again, like I said before, this is Hector Cabone speaking. Yes, but again, I think that in most agencies, you're going to get that as your clients come in, as your consumers come in the door on an individual basis, you're going to identify with that. So yes, it's good to have a broad knowledge base and try to keep that knowledge base at hand. I agree with that. But at the same time, we don't want to dilute. I don't want to dilute the process. So I think it's really important to keep it on an individual basis, but keep that knowledge base handy that your agency members and providers can use.
Can you email us more about Title VI? It would be an excellent resource for our community.
The question was, can we email more information about Title VI? At the end of the training, there's also a link to Title VI on our resource and reference page. So you'll definitely have more information when we go further on in the training, the webinar. I'm sorry.
Okay. I got one more question here. I'm going to paraphrase this, so the person who was asking the question, if this doesn't accurately capture your what you were asking, please send another question in. But please try to be succinct. So I'm paraphrasing here. In regards to the role, in regards to the role of the of cultural competence, how, and maybe Hector could speak to this. How do things like transference and countertransference interfere or help or hinder with the relationship with the client?
Well, that's another good question. Again, when a clinician, for example, I'll speak as an example. If I'm treating a Hispanic member and they talk about their situations, I could, instead of really doing the work I need to do to help them, I can experience that transference where the client will, again, talk about issues about themselves, and I lose focus on that and helping them. So it's more of an assimilation of the client and not me being a provider and helping them understand what their problems are. And then there's also the other side of the coin is that in the same scenario is me just ignoring that. Me ignoring those things that the client, speaks about of being their issues. And because of my biases and stereotypes, I put it aside by assimilations that what this culture does.
Okay.
We're going to move on to the next segment, and that's connections. What is culture? Culture is different values, traditions, history, folklore, and institutions of a group of people that are unified by race, ethnicity, nationality, language, spiritual, social, economic status, social class, sexual orientation, disability, or any other cohesive group variable. So culture changes over time, and it could change over generation. I know for myself, what I experience is different from my grandmother and what we accept, even though we're the same culture. So, and what is acceptable amongst my peers is different from generations ago. And culture can be is a connector. From my understanding with culture competency, culture is a connector, and we can take what we learn to connect with the client. And here we have just the supporting document from the Surgeon General's mental health report that says culture bears upon whether people even seek help in the first place, what types of help they seek, and what coping styles and social supports they have, and how much stigma they attach to mental illness. So this is something that supports that culture does matter when clients are receiving services and treatment. And in this diagram, we can look at different layers of culture, and in the inner circle, we have the primary dimensions, the things that influence who we are as individuals. Those things are sexual orientation, self-identification, perceptions of physical quality, culture and history, your language, your race, and your ethnicity. In the outer circle are some examples of employment that impacts, those are the secondary dimensions that make up a person's culture. The physical abilities, again, spiritual beliefs, your education, and your literacy level. We are our families. The layers that are shaped, the layers that we have are shaped by our family's influence, what we value as important, what we group as norms. For many people, being an individual is important, but for many others, family connections are a priority. For most people of color, family is important. Culturally and linguistic appropriate services. This is another form, and these are standards. Culturally competent care, and the legal responsibilities to provide language access services. There's 14 mandates, and you can access those in their entirety at the end of the training. We do provide a link to that. But 4 through 7 are mandated. You have to have a provision of language-assisted services for consumers with limited English proficiency or for those with sensory deficits of impairments, such as being deaf or blind. Organizational supports for cultural competency. Intent for federal and state accrediting agencies to implement provider mandates. So those mandates are the ones that are mandated by law, and that's supported by the class standards are supported by the Title VI. And peer run groups are included in the mandates for Title VI in the class standards. Communication needs. This is a regulation that is from OMH, and it's the 5274 regulation. No facility shall deny care and treatment to or otherwise discriminate against persons who are non-English speaking, deaf, or hard of hearing. Each facility should ensure the quality level of services are equal to that made available to all other recipients. The timely availability of interpreters is provided when necessary for effective communication. So that's basically saying you can't have someone in your aid. You shouldn't have someone be admitted to like one of our state facilities and them be there for a week without being able to talk to or communicate with anyone because of our language access. A practical look at cultural competency. So again, we're talking about the processes of becoming culturally competent, and that's looking at all our service components for practices that help or hinder the process of engagement. Seeking meaningful inclusion of the cultural considerations throughout the planning process. And again, that's why we support the fact that it should be individualistically approached, because just because someone's Hispanic doesn't mean that they may need language access. They may have been here for several years, or they've been, their parents, great-great-parents were born in a different country. So it's the process of looking at our intakes, our informed consents, treatment and services, and looking for meaningful consumer participation in all decisions, the shared decision-making process. Recovery and planning. So in the first one, we have like introductions, identifying what language people speak. Do you understand their cultural considerations? Does that person even read or write? Are there barriers to engagement? And being able to share yourself with those persons in small steps, that's a big thing. And number 2, we have resource and identification, looking for strengths, recognizing existing individual, family, and community resources. So those are the things we look for with individuals, and what community resources can we utilize to help engage the person that we're seeking to help. And how does that person see their recovery and their illness? And resolving any issues to engagement. And then box number 3, we're looking at different types of access to resources, such as, again, looking at how the process of navigating the system, entitlements and applications, so them knowing their rights and how to apply that to the services that they're receiving, employment, health insurance, education, even the fact of daycare, them being able to come to treatment for because of daycare issues and how long they could participate in that, and being able to adapt our services in treatment and recovery to the needs of our clients. Recognizing and acknowledging those differences, providing language assistance, having respect, and building upon strengths, and partnering with the people that we serve for decision making. So when we talk about culture competence, it's everything rolled, all of these components rolled up in one to provide that services. That's language, traditional values, spiritual beliefs, and that's considering what their spiritual beliefs into their treatment, their connections to the communities, making sure that we respect and understand those connections, or how to get that community involvement within our agencies. Having the agency commitment, the agency being committed to those consumers of different cultural, different economic backgrounds to provide those services. The provider being committed to those to the treatment and being culturally competent. Individuals' rights, peer support, and self-determination, all linked to being to giving person-centered care. Here's our resource and reference page. I'm not sure if the links are,
What's that?
the web pages, the links lit up, but these are the pages you can go to find information about the class standards, the Centers of Excellence, their direct link, so that you can find other resources for cultural agencies that specify with culture, and they also give demographics for different communities. They also have different type of research that they've done surrounding culture. So if you go to their link, you can navigate through there to find information about particular groups and things like that. And then we have the National Center for Cultural Competence through Georgetown, and the Office of Mental Health. The communication needs can be found in their entirety through that link. And these are the references we use. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to go back to that page so people can see it. And this is our contact information for more assistance and technical support. And we like to thank the Multicultural Advisory Committee for their contributions and support. And for additional information, you can call our office at 518-473-4144.
Great. And now we have some time for questions.
So we'll be taking additional questions at this time.
So this refers back to in the beginning of our presentation around evidence-based practices. It's not clear how the client is engaged by staff person in reference to culture through evidence-based practices.
That's something that's still up for research. To this day, unfortunately, there hasn't been any standardized tools for assessment, and that's one area that we hope in time will improve. Nathan Klein is doing some work on this matter. They are starting to do some work on cultural competence assessment tools. As a matter of fact, if you go to their website, they did one on an organizational level. Again, this is something we hope to see more of, and it's a great question. But however, it doesn't take away from the evidence-based work that has been done. And again, there's a lot of work out there for various ethnic groups. Again, Nathan Klein and the New York State Psychiatric Center Institute are leaders in this area. I recommend all of you, and I encourage all of you to visit our Centers of Excellence websites. And they will answer a lot of those questions, and you'll start seeing these tools or assessment tools that's out there. And please, go into those two areas as we're aware of in Georgetown, we'll answer a lot of questions in regards to assessment tools and evidence-based practice.
This is my question as a follow-up to that. Would the asking stance, would that be something that would be related to this?
Yes, I think the asking stance, the intent, it has a multifunction, the asking stance. The asking stance has a multifunction. It's one, to make all consumers, family members, providers aware of the federal and state regulations, Title VI, class standards. Also, there's New York State regulations that are involved, that we as New York State have to make sure that people are culturally competent. We want this tool, again, to be of a cultural awareness educational tool, but at the same time, provide information and resources for providers to utilize, to address cultural competence issues, so that they can improve their processes, like the intake process and asking those questions and being more informative. Like, for example, in the engagement for recovery planning, that process alone, if you go to that slide, provides a lot of that information on how providers and consumers can improve in this area, and being culturally competent. So I recommend you to go to that slide, in the recovery planning slide, to talk about that. It provides a lot of information.
So being a female, if I am dealing with a male whose culture feels it's okay to mistreat women, how do I handle this?
Well, being a professional, and
just repeat the question.
the question was, and working with a client that being a female, working with a client that cultures feels that it's okay to talk down and treat women as secondary. How do you handle that? And in my professional opinion, I would say that you need to remain professional and try to stick to the procedures and practices within your agency that you've already set up, as long as it's not offensive. Because in any way, you don't want to be disrespected in trying to engage someone.
Each organization should have their own policy and grievance. So if you feel that, as a consumer, if you feel that you're being mistreated, based on your sexual orientation or what have you, you have a right to file a grievance at that agency to see that matters sought through by the agency, by the supervisor, to be addressed. It's very important, and that you should follow up with that.
What if this is my question around that? What if somebody breaks the law? I mean, if someone's mistreating someone, it's an escalation to domestic violence.
As a provider?
Yeah.
The question was, what if someone? I'm assuming the question was, what if someone breaks the law, and it's almost domestic violence with a provider? You would call the police. You don't tolerate that type of abuse from anyone, not even a client. That's not what cultural competence is about. It's more about engaging that client.
Each agency, again, will be different on that to respond to that question. As a social worker, it's a duty to warn. Number one, that as social workers, it's a duty to warn individuals someone threatens. So that's automatic under social work, under our ethics and our responsibilities. Duty to warn, we have to inform the party that's being of harm or potential of harm. That's automatic. So again, there's certain aspects involved in that question that makes it complicated because people are not understanding their roles and their responsibility. So,
what did Alatisha say about peer services and Title VI standards?
I said that the question was, what did I say about peer service and Title VI standards? I said that peer services in agencies and organizations are held to the same Title VI regulations.
We're getting a lot of questions about the slides, and the slides will be sent out via email to everyone probably on Friday, no later than next week. So we will get the slides out to folks. People are finding them very helpful.
Okay.
There's some long questions.
One moment, we're waiting for the questions.
So, does or why doesn't the Cultural Competence Bureau have a devoted web page on the OMH website with resources, tools, and updates and efforts OMH is taking towards cultural competency?
We are working on our website as we speak. It should be up in short weeks. We are working on it, though. It's definitely, the page has already been designed, so we're on it. And you'll be able to access those tools that we spoke about, Title VI, the Title VI forms, if you're having a problem with anybody not being able, without providing language access, and those complaint forms to culturally relevant services.
Some of the issues that are getting missed is low health literacy goes beyond the ability to read or write. It is one's understanding of diagnosis, medications, med compliance, etc. And Latino, Hispanic issues goes beyond language.
The question was that health literacy was not covered. That was an issue. Latino issues goes beyond languages. And that's true. The reason that we did not go into health literacy because that was a long component of the training. We only had an hour. That's a long component that you can go into for hours, and the webinar was only for an hour. So we tried to give an overview about language access and not go into that type of details. But that's a good suggestion. We'll take note of that so that way we can follow up with maybe a follow-up webinar about health literacy.
Yeah, we can do a follow-up webinar. And at the end of this webinar, there will be a survey. And one of the questions on it is, are there other topics that you'd like to see us do in the future? So please put that in there for us.
Thank you.
Okay. It seems from this webinar that cultural competence takes cultural diversity one step further. Is this right?
The question was, it seems like culture competency takes culture diversity one step further. Absolutely. That's what it's geared towards. Culture competency is the actions and steps towards complete cultural inclusiveness.
How would OMH judge or score a program on their level of cultural competency? What would they specifically look for?
You ask a good question, and at this, as you recall, I'm not sure if you're aware, this NAMI did a report card on us, on the state of New York, and we received a grade on all the states, and we received a B for that score. So as for that, I think that shows growth. And again, we would like to have that be bigger. We'd like to see that improve and standardize in more areas. But as for now, to know that, we are improving in that area is a big step for the state of New York.
Comment. Thank you very much for the information. Question. Can either of you clarify for us, recently we are informed that the appropriate way to reference Spanish-speaking individuals was Latin Americans, not Hispanics. Have you heard either with regard to acknowledging all the Latin cultures? Thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
I think you should ask the client how they would like to be referred to, because some say Hispanic and some say Latino or Latina. It might refer to a specific group, because I've heard that Latino and Latina refer to the South American Hispanics. So it depends on the person and the client, so you should ask them what they like to be referred as.
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the cultural context and how the word is used, that it doesn't offend individuals. But it is a good question.
It is definitely, because I like to be referred to as Caribbean American, because I'm both.
And I'm Puerto Rican, so I like to refer as a Puerto Rican. But again,
okay. Regarding recovery and planning processes, number one, introduction. Can you elaborate on what sharing self in small steps?
That means what I'm taking from sharing. The question was in recovery and planning process. What does it mean to share yourself in small steps? That is sharing yourself as a person in a professional manner when you're dealing with someone, but sharing yourself in small dosages to engage the client, not to keep yourself shut down as a provider of I'm here to don't ask me any questions, I'm here to help you, I ask all the questions. So being able to engage the client in a two-way conversation that in the past used to be seen as a taboo. You want to add that, right?
Well, I think also, again, for different cultures, again, from my social work experience, is acknowledging how cultures communicate and interact with providers. Again, traditions and values and how this is done, it creates some challenges in communication. So I would hope that, the consumers and family members are great educators in this. And I would hope that I empower you to train us, to train providers in this process of how we can better engage and understand your family, your communication styles. And that's a big step for consumers and family members to take to go out there and, to open up. But it's a process that's mutual. And it's very important, I think, that consumers be responsible in sharing a little bit of themselves too, because that's how you can effectively communicate and integrate knowledge.
How do you address issues of alternative lifestyles and polygamy?
The question was, how do you address issues of alternative lifestyle and polygamy? And I don't know. I'm stumped by the question.
Alternative lifestyle is the broad term. If you are talking about gender identity issues or sexual orientation preferences, again, that's up to the individual on how that is, how they practice their lifestyle. I mean, it's not to be judgmental.
And we don't see that as an issue. That, again, it comes from the individual level where you engage the client, and if they prefer to be gender neutral and they don't want you to refer to those are gender roles, we can't be oppressive in our treatment. Polygamy. And we don't, and again, if somebody has polygamous religion, you have to incorporate that into their treatment, or you're not going to serve the client in their best way. It's just figuring out what that is. Even if we see it as taboo, we have to put that down and see the client, not things that we want, imposing.
You pose a good question, and this goes back to the countertransference and transference issues that people deal with as providers. And working with people of different sexual orientation or gender identity or even religious practices, it can be difficult. And that's something that providers really need to have that cultural awareness and sensitivity to. It's more on them to come to that understanding. It's not the consumer's fault about who they are, and what their culture is. And that's a big piece to understand here, that, whatever your practice in religious or spirituality or practice may be, that's who you are, and that should be accepted.
Do they have a score sheet or report card that can be sent to programs for reference?
The question was, do they have a scorecard or score sheet for preferences and references? No, they do not.
Do you have any information on what consumers think about the fact that sexual orientation is not covered under Title VI?
The question was, do we have any information about how consumers feel that sexual orientation is not covered under Title VI? We don't have that information at hand, but we can look it up. We can research that and get back to you.
That is a good question. It is a very good question.
Is culture and sexual preference the same thing?
No. I think that's preference. It's.
Can you just repeat the question?
No, it's not the same. Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
The question was culture and sexual preference the same thing?
No, I think to say that sexual preference, I don't think it's not about preference. It's basically about the individual, who they identify with. That's their choice of who they are as an individual. So even using the word preference connotates a demeaning, descriptive, about a person. So And culture, culture is is the big picture of the individual. Your sexual orientation is only one part of you. As you refer to the diagram that Letitia presented in the end, the concentric circles. You can go about all those individual aspects, and also the primary, second dimensions of the individual. That's what culture is. That's a big picture. There's a thing that said, it says the sum of the parts are greater than the whole, and that's what it is. The parts of the individual, there is a whole bunch that make up that person. That's very valuable. It's not the whole person. It's all those attributes that make who you are, that make you valuable.
Will a client-centered approach be the best choice in helping us as providers to be culturally competent in our work as social workers?
Yes.
The question was, will a client-centered approach be helpful with providers to help a client in their work as social workers? And the question is absolutely yes, because that if you person-centered, inclusive to the client, there's no way you can miss cultural competency. And that's the path towards that recovery that a client is seeking, because it's all inclusive.
How can, the question to that is, how can you treat the client if you don't understand what they like and don't like, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what are their community connections, what things that they connected to treatment, know their dislikes and not dislikes. So I think, you can't treat the person if you don't know who they are and what their makeup is. So yes, client-centered care, without that you can't do effective treatment. It starts where the client's at. It's right where the client's at in the beginning.
One person disagrees that sexual orientation is part of a person's culture, and unfortunately, we're not able to have a discussion via the webinar.
Yeah. That's
So,
a chat.
yeah. Well, it's okay to disagree. We're just not able to address it via webinar.
We're not going to address it.
Okay.
Is there any other questions?
I don't see any other questions. Would you mind if I just elaborated on the alternative lifestyle from a personal?
Yeah.
Okay. So, since we don't have any more questions, I was just going to elaborate a little bit on the question around alternative lifestyles and how a person would approach that. So, as Hector had said, alternative lifestyles is a very broad term. So, from my perspective, I was and I still consider myself part of the punk movement. And there was a time when I had a mohawk and was trying to tear down the system from the outside, but now I'm on the inside trying to tear down the system, and I wear a tie instead of a studded leather jacket. But the way that it was best for providers to approach me, not in a judgmental way, but as in a curious way, just being curious about what I was doing, because although from the outside it seemed like it was pretty self-destructive, it was actually very supportive for me, and it helped me get through my time. So, from my perspective, I needed that, and when providers tried to change me or tried to deprogram me, as they said, that wasn't helpful at all, and I just dug my heels in a lot deeper. So that's all I wanted to say.
Are there any more questions?
Let's see if we got any more here. Okay. So just a clarification. So what I think you are saying is that we need to be careful about our own biases when dealing with clients.
Is that the question was, do we need to be careful about our own biases when we're dealing with clients? Exactly. That's absolutely true. We need to be mindful of who we are and mindful of where the client's at. Any more questions?
No, I think that's it.
There's no more questions. We would like to thank you for your time today on the webinar.
Again, thank you again for having us. We look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Okay, we've got one more slide to do here, and let's see, there we go. Okay, for the April webinar, again, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Hector and Letitia for providing us with all the information that they did today. I think they did a great job. Our April webinar is going to be We Can Work, and it's about building hope and capacity so that all people with psychiatric disabilities in New York State achieve employment and economic integration. They've got a lot of great material. I've seen some of it already, and it's really fantastic. You know, people with psychiatric disabilities want to work, we can work, and they're going to give us some great information on how we can get involved with that. There's the registration information for it. It will be Wednesday, April 29th, 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. The presenters will be Oscar Jimenez and Matt Mathai from IOPERS. And I will be ending the webinar in just a minute or two. And when the webinar ends, please just stay on the line until the webinar ends, and then you will get the survey, and you can fill that out. It's just about 4 or 5 real quick questions that you can fill out to give us some feedback on how we can make these even better. And it seems like we're getting a lot better at it, because I want to congratulate Hector and Letitia, because this was the record. We've broken the previous mark, so we had up to 113 people the last time I checked. So we broke the 100 mark. So congratulations to everybody, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye-bye now.